There were definitely a few times when there was no money in the bank.
Before Careem became one of the defining startup stories of the Middle East, Mudassir Sheikha was trying to keep it alive from one funding round to the next. He'd left a safe consulting job, and he and his co-founder had each invested $50,000 of their own money into the company. In the early days, Careem wasn't an app that magically matched riders and drivers. It was the founders calling drivers themselves in the early hours of the morning. And 7 years later, Uber, the rival Careem spent years fighting, agreed to buy the company in a landmark deal for the region.
To do a deal with our biggest rival, the company that we thought was trying to kill us, was just very, very difficult for the organization.
There are 3 numbers to look out for in Careem's story. $100,000, the combined investment made by Mudassir and his co-founder at the start. $3.1 billion, the amount Uber paid to acquire the company. And over 75 million, the number of customers Careem says it has reached across the region. This is Founder Effect.
This is Mudassir Sheikha. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Careem. So Careem is the everything app of the Middle East. We started with ride hailing, but today we have almost 20 services in a single app, which includes food, grocery delivery, payments, and a host of other services. If you're living in the Middle East, this is the one-stop shop for everything that you need for your daily life.
Mudassir's story began in Karachi, Pakistan's largest city.
I grew up in a middle-class family in Karachi, the son of a rice trader and a tiger mom. It was a tough childhood. Nothing was good enough, but in hindsight, that was sort of the upbringing that you need to achieve big things in life.
That upbringing pushed Mudassir toward a familiar version of success: education, stability, and a serious career. But in the US, he caught the startup bug during the dot-com boom, and his first company failed.
That was a spectacular disaster. Tried another couple. They were okay from an exit standpoint. So I had joined McKinsey as a 2-year program to learn how to do business.
That's where he met Magnus Olsson, a Swedish consultant who would become one of Careem's co-founders.
In 2011, he had a bleeding in his brain that almost took his life. The doctors basically told him, wrap up your life. And in the deep reflection that happened in that process, he promised himself that if he survives, he will call himself Magnus 2.0 and build something big and meaningful. So that really became the starting point of Careem.
Big and meaningful became the brief. They looked at healthcare, they looked at education. Then, a former boss pointed them toward transportation. The problem sounded simple. Getting around was unreliable, expensive, and difficult to manage. For companies, booking and reconciling rides was a mess.
It's hard to get clean cars. It's hard to get captains that can speak your language. It's hard to pay easily if you don't have the local currency. There were so many things that were broken about that experience.
But Magnus wasn't convinced.
And I went to Magnus and said, hey, we found an idea. This can be very, very big. And he looked at me and said, I'm getting a second chance in life. And you're telling me that we should move consultants around for a living? That doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
What changed his mind was a driver he met in Abu Dhabi during Ramadan. He was working 12 to 14 hours a day, sending 90% of his earnings home to educate his kids, and sharing a bed in shifts with other workers.
We thought, not only is this idea big, but if he can solve the lives of people like him at scale, it would be very meaningful as well. So we found ground transportation as the idea that could be big and meaningful, and that's how the journey of Careem started.
Careem launched in Dubai in 2012.
It was radically basic. All we had was a website. We would get an email. That email would trigger a phone, and the phone would start buzzing that there is a new booking. And we'd call each of these different captains manually. Hey, are you able to take this booking? We're guiding captains at wee hours of the morning.
That early mess became a kind of product research. Every late night call taught the founders what customers were actually asking for and what drivers needed to make the service work. Inside Careem, those drivers became captains. And they say this title wasn't just branding. It was a way to signal that the people behind the wheel were the face of the company.
We literally built the service with them. And it would pain us that in the society, and we have many great things about our culture, but one thing that bothered us a little bit is these captains were seen as drivers and not treated as equals by many of our customers. And captains would call me and say, this is Captain Tariq. And you could see the pride in their voice. And now we see the word captain being used everywhere.
Careem was building a ride-hailing company in a region where much of the startup ecosystem was still taking shape.
Back when we started, I remember there were maybe 3 VC firms, and we went to all of them. They all said no. Every funding round, we literally had one term sheet. We're like one term sheet away from not surviving and growing as a business. Yeah, look, building a tech company anywhere is hard, but in markets like the Middle East, where the ecosystem doesn't exist, especially hard for 3 high-level reasons. The first is funding, the second is talent, and the third is infrastructure.
That infrastructure problem showed up in basic ways. Even the map had to become part of the product.
Like when you're building a startup in San Francisco, you don't have to worry about maps. The maps are there, they're accurate, they've been built. But we had to rebuild maps because many of the maps did not have places like Jumeirah Village Triangle or the Ministry of Education or the Ministry of Transport. So many things that you could just take for granted were just not present, and they had to be built bit by bit. Payments is another one. Most of the people were still using cash in the region. So we had to build a cash collection network to make sure that we are able to provide the service and collect money from customers.
In Silicon Valley, a startup could build on top of systems that already worked. Careem had to build around the gaps. That made the company slower in some ways, but also harder to copy. Careem first proved the model in the UAE, in Dubai and Abu Dhabi. Then the team took it to Doha in Qatar and wrote a launch playbook.
We took that playbook and said, let's replay this playbook in Riyadh, which was the next city that we went to. And while we were able to get the service up and running through the playbook, the service just didn't take off. Like customers were not using the service. It wasn't until we got local leadership on board that understood that city, understood that culture, is when things started really taking off.
That became one of Careem's biggest lessons. They learned the region wasn't just one market. What worked in Dubai did not automatically work in Riyadh. As Careem expanded, it had to earn trust city by city. Nowhere was that clearer than in Saudi Arabia, where women still weren't allowed to drive at the time.
I was at an event in Saudi in the 4th, 5th year of Careem, and a woman in the audience got up and said, there was a pre-Careem Saudi and there's a post-Careem Saudi. In the pre-Careem Saudi, we were dependent on our male relatives or drivers to take us around. In the post-Careem Saudi, we feel very empowered. We can go to work, we can go out when we want. We're just more in control of our own lives.
That made Saudi one of Careem's most important markets, but also raised a question from investors. What happens to that demand if women are allowed to drive?
So when the decree came out that women can drive in Saudi, literally in the next hour, we launched our first women captains. And we called them captinas, of course.
Amidst all that growth, Careem was also repeatedly low on cash.
There were definitely a few times when there was no money in the bank. So Magnus and I had to inject some more money from our personal bank accounts into the business to keep it going.
During one funding round, with documents still unsigned, Mudassir had to call his lead investor and tell him the company was out of funds.
And he said, send me the bank account information and I'll get the funds in. Literally in the next 24 hours, $500,000 end up in the bank account to keep us going. I was like, wow, nothing has been signed. This is just a word from him. A few months later, that $500,000 is out as well. And I call him again. Again, he's fired another $500,000. Careem could have been done if it weren't for people like him.
By the late 2010s, Careem was facing a different kind of pressure. Uber, its biggest global rival, wanted the region.
And they approached us, and they were more honest than we thought at that time. They said, this is our view of the world, this is what's going to happen here. And we're like, man, they're just trying to distract us. You know, we go down this path and then they will take advantage of this and sort of kill us commercially.
When Dara Khosrowshahi took over as Uber's CEO, the conversation changed. But Mudassir had seen what had happened to some of the region's earlier internet success stories.
Maktub was acquired by Yahoo, and then we don't even know of Maktub. Souq got acquired by Amazon, and now there's only Amazon. So we didn't want Careem to face the same fate. And Dara was very, very generous and kind. And he said, look, nothing has to change. I'll just become a better investor than your existing investors. Careem stays independent. If you guys want to keep going, keep going.
But the decision still divided Careem internally.
And it wasn't until one of our early investors and mentors basically told us very, very brutally, very, very clearly that you'd be selfish if you don't take this deal. And the reason you'll be selfish is because this ecosystem needs an exit. This would be a phenomenal exit to be a catalyst for this ecosystem.
In 2019, Uber agreed to buy Careem in a deal valued at $3.1 billion US. The acquisition closed the following year. But inside Careem, the reaction was not simple celebration.
I said, hey, this is happening tomorrow. And I could literally see his jaws drop in sadness. Okay, this is great for me financially, but he's like, this is the worst kind of money I'm going to make.
Then, almost immediately after the deal closed, COVID hit.
Business was down 90%. So who knows if Careem would have survived COVID independently. And thanks to Uber, they didn't walk away. They stuck by their promise and they funded us, they supported us, and made sure that we weren't just doing ride-hailing, but we were now able to do many other things that were relevant at that time versus deliveries, payments, and so on and so forth. So that's when we became the Everything app.
Mudassir says the exit also changed how the region saw startups.
Investors finally saw that a startup from the region can actually be a source of very good returns. All of a sudden, there was an explosion of top talent that was doing startups and joining startups. Governments in the region saw this as a way that they can diversify their economies away from hydrocarbons.
Today, Careem is no longer just a ride-hailing company. For users, it's still one app. Behind the scenes, the business is more complicated. Uber owns Careem's ride-hailing business, while the rest of the app sits inside Careem Technologies, backed by Uber, and Careem's founders. The strategy is to build around services people use every day, moving through the city, ordering food and groceries, and paying for things inside the same app.
So of course you can build anything and everything under the sun, but customers are not going to give you credit for things that are very outside your core. If you really look at the next level of details, we're an Everything app in a few markets and not in most of our markets. In the UAE, we have 20 services on the app. A customer can literally live their life on Careem. But in the rest of the region, we're still largely a ride-hailing business.
Mudassir is now thinking about whether Careem should become what he calls an everything agent for the real world. That's because AI agents could soon become the first place customers go to order a ride, send money, or get dinner.
The biggest risk is that you lose your contact with customers, because it's very easy for a customer to use ChatGPT or Claude and get the services they want without having to go through the Careem app. And then we can become very similar to what the telcos have become, a dumb pipe.
His answer is not just to defend the app, it's to imagine what comes after it.
So just like we became the first Everything app in the region in 2020. It's probably time to start thinking what that Everything agent looks like and take the next leap into the AI future.
But even as Careem evolves, Mudassir says he still comes back to his original founder brief.
If you're going to do something big. And to do something big, you need to find a big problem. Every problem is an opportunity. The bigger the problem, the bigger the opportunity. Find something big, but start small.